This is assignment 8, lab 8 assignment, so the way I'm going to try to explain it might not make sense because I'm still trying to understand it myself. There's a lot of different things happening at once, so basically the first thing that you need to know is that a memory database is created called test database. A student object is here. It is an entity, which means that this whole student class is now represented as a row within a database. So this would be the name of the row, or this would be the object of the row, or the type rather. This would be a field, or these properties would be fields. So ID would be the name of the field. The value of ID would be the value of that field. That's basically what entity does. It makes it a row within a database. And then ID, I'm pretty sure ID just says, okay, the generated value so specify ID is an ID within a database, and then say every time a new student is created, increment ID by 1. That's how I believe that works. Then, so this is a REST controller, this request mapping, so all of these mappings can be accessed via the student's endpoint. And so auto-wired, this is basically, this basically allows you to, like auto-wired allows you to acquire a bean. And what that means is that instead of having to say student repository, instead of having to say this, like student repository equals student repository equals new, you can just, you can just say, you can just do this. And so basically this repository, and so we have this interface. The student repository extends JPA repository. This is basically, this JPA repository has all the methods or functions like this. So the JPA repository has a save function, the find all function, and delete by ID function. So this basically says give student repository all of the functionality that the JPA repository interface gives. And whenever any of these are called on to repository, so whenever you say repository.save, the data is not stored within repository. Repository is just the means to interact with this test database. So whenever I say repository.save, I'm really saying save it to the test database. And repository is just the tools to be able to interact with test database. And so whenever the functionality is inherited from JPA repository and given to student repository, then repository becomes a bean. And then when it becomes a bean, it's eligible to be collected via auto-wired and injected into here, so that way you can use it without having to create a new instance of it. And then, so post mapping, so these mappings are all ways for this controller to respond to HTTP requests. And so basically, this request body will say, an HTTP request is basically a head and a body. Well, this request body takes the data from that request body, and it says take the JSON or XML format of that data, try to convert it to a student, and then save that student inside of the test database using the JPA repository .save method. So that's what that does, and then it returns that student that was saved. And so the get mapping, they pretty much do the same. So like this will uh, return all the students. Now this, whenever you access the /students endpoint, this will search for what is after the student's endpoint. So anything you write after the student's endpoint, any numbers, it will get what you put, and then it will take it, and then it will also it will take the ID that you wrote in for the endpoint. So after the student's endpoint, it's now looking for the ID and like endpoint, and then or it's taking everything you wrote after the student's endpoint and assigning that to ID, and then it's also taking the body or the body part of the HTTP request's data, converting it into a student, and then creating an existing student by finding the by finding the student whose ID is what you wrote within the database. And so yeah, so this this basically just allows you to get a student, or no, this allows you to put a new or update a existing student within the database. This allows you to put a new student into the database, and so it finds that student from their ID. It sets that existing student within the database's properties to the student that you put within the data part of the body section of the HTTP request. And so all this will be done in curl in here later. So maybe I'll be able to explain myself better what that means, and then after you've changed the local variable student. So basically, whenever you're doing this, you're literally creating an entirely new local student, and when you change it, it doesn't actually change it in the database until you save it. So once you've changed that existing student's data, you save it, and then this just takes after the /students endpoint anything that was put there, puts it into here as a parameter, and then goes into the test database, and then it finds that student with that ID, and then deletes. And all these functions or methods, you could call them, within this JPA repository are already secured, so no SQL attacks can occur with these functions because they're sanitized and they're made into strings basically, so that they cannot contain any malicious thingies. So now going to go here and do the curl command. So now I do not know them off the top of my head, so I'm going to acquire them on my other monitor. And so these will allow me to actually test if all of the commands from the interface are actually able to interact properly with the test DB. So let's see if I can find the commands. Okay, so I'm going to add a new student. Curl x post. So I'm going to go to the post mapping, and then HTTP localhost 8080 students. So this is saying this will display to me the students that already exist. Actually, this will display to me the existing students. Yeah. This will display to be the test DB, right? And this post mapping, I'm going to, and when I do this, it's specifying that I'm continuing this command on a new line, and then I'm going to. So this is specifying the. So right now, what I'm basically doing is I'm creating an HTTP request, and so the whole purpose of this controller is how to handle. It's this controller basically tells the program how to handle HTTP requests. And so I'm making a request right now. I'm going to specify the content type, and then this I'm specifying that. So I'm specifying that the content type equals application JSON. So basically, the data part of this HTTP request will be written in JSON. In the JSON format, it's basically just a way to, it's a way to format data basically in a very space-effective way. So I'm going to continue the command on the next line. This is specifying the data section of the HTTP request. So this is the header, and you could call this section the body. And I'm going to create a JSON of. I'm going to create a JSON format of a student. So the student has a name. Let's name it Connor. And then the student has a email. And I don't need to specify the ID because it is done automatically. Here it generates the ID depending on the number of students that has been created. So because this is the first student that will be created, the ID that's generated is 1, will be 1. And so I specify the email, just Connor. I can just specify that, and then I can close it off. And there should be a full HTTP request where a student is added to the database itself. Oh yeah, and then I can don't know why that's continuing. That's kind of strange. I have no idea why it's continuing. Why would it? Okay. I have no idea why that's happening, so I'm just gonna restart git. And I'm just gonna copy the command that I did. So I have a sample copy here. Let me just copy it again. So basically, it's pretty much the same thing, but it's instead as John Doe and John at example. And as you can see, it was added. ID is 2. So I guess it would be the second thing. Let's just display what's stored, and this is these are all the students stored within the test DB. And so I'm just gonna do some quick other commands. So, and yeah, so that is a full HTTP request to the student controller, and you can see the student controller handled that HTTP request using this post mapping. It was so we've added a new student using the post mapping post method. So basically, post is a method of an HTTP request, and so this is what to do when an HTTP request is sent using the post method, and then it's just saved to the database. I can run a couple more commands, so obviously this is the get. So this would be the HTTP get command. It just gives me everything from the students. Then I can put a new student, so I can update the information. It did not display to me what it was, so put can basically change. So this will change the um, student located at index 2. So because the ID is 2, I'm just going to change that. So it will change John Doe to Jane Smith. And then I can display it, and you can obviously see that John Doe was changed to Jane Smith. And then I can finally delete the student located at, I don't know why it's not showing for me. Sometimes I have no idea. Oh my gosh, why is it not showing? Git bash is sometimes very okay. It curl x delete http / localhost 8080 / students / 2. Then I display it, and obviously it was deleted. And that is the very high level overview of basically what this whole thing does. It's pretty hard to understand a lot of it because it uses a lot, like a lot of this stuff is just happening in the background. Like it was hard for me to, it was hard for me to even understand that 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 I'm not actually storing things in repository. I'm storing things in the testDB, and the repository is just the means of which to interact with the testDB. And stuff like this, like the generated value, the entity. A lot of this stuff is happening behind the scenes, like the auto-wired and what a bean is, and how a bean is, like, it's a bean because this JPA repository has generated the functionality for it. But it's not a bean, but the interface itself is not a bean. It's very, so yeah, it's a lot to understand, but hopefully it makes sense. And I mean, I'm just now kind of figuring out that these mappings are literally these are just the means of which this controller reacts to HTTP requests. And HTTP requests have a post method, a get method, a put method, and a delete method. And so that's just how, and a controller is just basically how your program will react to two HTTP requests, depending on what the method of the HTTP method was. It will call the related function. And yeah, hopefully that made sense. And yeah, thank you.